If you've been watching my videos for a while, you've probably noticed that I'm a bit of a nostalgia fiend. I love playing or talking about games that I played when I was growing up, regardless of whether they were good or bad. And given how retro gaming is only getting more and more popular, I know I'm not the only one. But today I'd like to go in a slightly different direction and talk about modern games that still manage to bring with it that old school feeling, while keeping up with the modern standards. Whether that's through its graphics, gameplay, or just the general vibe of the game. So with that, here are some modern games that I still think manage to capture the magic of classic gaming. Nikoderiko: The Magical World, developed by VEA Games. Platformers have seen a bit of a fall from grace over the years. Don't get me wrong, there's still some fantastic ones out there. The Mario series is still going strong, the Spyro and Crash Bandicoot remakes sold like hotcakes, and Sony's Astro Bot took the gaming world by storm. But these are all big names with major corporate backing. So enter nikoderiko, a completely new name that's just tricky enough to pronounce that it sticks in your head. What earns nikoderiko a spot on this list is how faithfully it captures that old school platformer magic, while still feeling fresh and new. The story, while not exactly Tolkien or Pratchett material, is a charming adventurous romp. It instantly reminded me of sitting in front of the TV as a kid, wearing nothing but my pants and spilling cereal down myself while watching Saturday morning cartoons. The world is bright, colourful, and brimming with eccentric fun characters that keep the narrative moving. The gameplay keeps you hooked seamlessly, switching between 3D platforming and 2D side-scrolling. And there's a ton to do, with mini-games and collectibles scattered across a variety of uniquely themed worlds, with each world having its own vibe, making it feel fresh and exciting every step of the way. And you can even enjoy the game with a friend or loved one too, as couch co-op is encouraged, which is something I personally love and wished more games would do. But let's be real, no platformer is complete without those brutally hard sections that make you want to headbutt a wall or take a bite out of your controller. And nikoderiko certainly delivers in that too, but balanced enough that when you pass those sections, you feel accomplished and successful, rather than just grateful to be through it. So if you have a love for those old school platformers like Super Mario, or you're closer to my age and grew up playing something like Spyro or Crash, nikoderiko certainly delivers that same feeling, but still being able to bring something new with it. Hollow Knight, developed by Team Cherry. There's something magical about Hollow Knight that feels like it was plucked straight out of the 90s and polished to perfection. This indie hit is the ultimate love letter to the Metroidvania genre, blending exploration, challenging combat, and minimalist storytelling into an experience that's as nostalgic as it is refreshing. At first glance, it's the art style that grabbed me. The hand-drawn visuals are simple yet stunning, creating a dark, hauntingly beautiful world that's so gorgeous to look at. The world of Hallownest is filled with quirky characters, hidden secrets, and an eerie charm that keeps you coming back for more, even when it's actively trying to crush your soul. Like other games in this list, Hollow Knight doesn't hold your hand, but it also doesn't slap it away. It's all about figuring things out for yourself. You're dropped into the game with no map, no clear instructions, and just enough cryptic dialogue to make you feel like you're missing something big. As you explore, you unlock abilities that open up new areas, gradually piecing together the sprawling, interconnected map in a way that's pure Super Metroid. The combat is tight and rewarding, with every swing of your nail requiring precision and timing, and the boss fights are punishing yet beautiful, feeling more like intricate dances than chaotic battles. And when you finally beat that one boss that's been making your life miserable, it's an adrenaline rush that's hard to beat. But what really makes Hollow Knight stand out is its atmosphere. From the melancholic music to the cryptic lore scattered throughout the game, it creates a sense of mystery that's reminiscent of the best parts of older games. It doesn't hand you anything, it trusts you to figure it out for yourself and draw your own conclusions. If you're a fan of classic Metroidvanias or just enjoy a good challenge, Hollow Knight is a no-brainer. Wasteland 3, developed by In Exile. Honestly, Wasteland 3 was a bit of a no-brainer for me when I was trying to think of CRPG games that still capture the feeling of the old greats. First of all, it's a legacy series in itself, so that old school CRPG feeling is pretty much woven into its DNA. And then you have its approach to things like conversations that feel like they could just go anywhere as long as you pass the right skill checks, and a sense of discovery and exploration that doesn't feel like it's trying to restrain or restrict you. Now, a big thing that I think a lot of old school CRPG fans feel nostalgic for is how difficult they used to be. Games like Fallout, Baldur's Gate, and Planescape aren't easy by any stretch of the imagination, especially if you try to go back to them now. But I don't necessarily think the games themselves were hard, but more so that those games trusted you to learn its more advanced mechanics and tactics for yourself, essentially letting you alter the difficulty by how you choose to build your character and fill your party. And Wasteland 3 manages to find that balance really well too. Although it does offer more in the way of a tutorial than a lot of similar games, and does have its own difficulty options, it doesn't take away from people that just want that brutal RPG experience. But it does make it a whole lot more accessible to players that are completely new to the genre, or for whatever reason can or don't want to die 1,000 times to understand what they're doing. But out of all that, the main thing that keeps this game so close to its old school ancestors is how much it still cares about the power of player choice. So many RPGs nowadays, regardless of what letter you put in front of it, or how much freedom is offered to you within the game's world, your choices and your effect on the world are usually so minuscule that it's barely noticeable. And good and evil are just so morally black and white that it just turns into amateur dramatics. Whereas Wasteland 3 lets you see the effect you have on the world, and leaves you questioning so many of the choices you make as to whether you've done the right thing or not, even when you make it to the credits. But it still keeps its tongue-in-cheek sense of humour and player-first approach front and centre, and to me that's such an important part of making you feel like you've truly immersed yourself into the role you're playing in the game. 2 Point Campus, developed by 2 Point Studios. Management sims have come a long way since the days of Theme Hospital and Roller Coaster Tycoon. These games used to feel like chaotic little sandboxes where everything could, and usually did, go wrong, in the most ridiculous of ways. And so now we have 2 Point Campus, a game that takes that silly charm and brings it into the modern era with a fresh coat of paint and way more opportunity for creative madness. At its core, 2 Point Campus is all about building and running a university. But rather than creating the next Oxford or Harvard, it's usually something more reminiscent of Greendale Community College. Instead of stuffy lecture halls and stressed out and underpaid professors, you're building a school where your student can learn some real essential skills, like being a knight, cooking giant foods, or harnessing the dark arts. And the gameplay nails that retro sim vibe, where every small decision can snowball into absolute chaos. You're juggling student happiness, campus facilities, and outrageous courses, while also not slipping into bankruptcy or selling out and underfunding your school. But of course, there's always something going wrong, whether it's students refusing to study or a rogue knight causing mayhem in the dorms. But it's the kind of going wrong that might have actually made school a fun place to be. What makes it stand out for me though is how approachable it is. Like take me for example. I'm not a hardcore fan of simulation games. I enjoy them now and then, but I don't spend a lot of time playing them, so I'm not overly familiar. But the game eases you in with intuitive controls and a layout that never feels like it's burying you in spreadsheets. And the humour is spot on. It's packed with silly characters, hilarious announcements over the PA, and scenarios that make it such a memorable experience. 2 Point Campus is such a fun, silly, yet rewarding game, and if you're like me and ever had a soft spot for something like Theme Hospital, then this is at least worth some of your time. Song of Horror, developed by Protocol Games. Survival horror is a genre that's swung back and forth on the edge of irrelevancy and mainstream more times than most others. It relies on subtlety and atmosphere, so especially nowadays when publishers push for bigger set pieces, faster paced gameplay, and innovative mechanics, it actively works against the developers being able to create something that's genuinely scary, which is why it's so hard to find a horror game that actually succeeds. But luckily for us, Protocol Games set out to prove that horror can still be immersive, scary, and tense, but at the same time still feel new and exciting, all while still channeling the feeling of the old greats. The most obvious comparison is the fixed camera angles. Although not exactly one of people's most favourite aspects of older horror titles, it does elevate that feeling of suspense and tension as you approach the boundaries of the screen, waiting to see what monstrosities await you. And graphically, the game is gorgeous, so rather than take anything away, this perspective just makes the whole experience feel much more cinematic. But along with its visual similarities, the gameplay itself is classic survival horror. It oozes atmosphere and quirky charm, the resources are scarce, backtracking is essential as you find items and solve puzzles, and the puzzles themselves are hard enough that it'll get your brain running, but not so hard that they can feel ridiculous or impassable. Now, as much as it's clearly inspired by old horror games, that doesn't mean Song of Horror isn't bringing anything new to the party. The game features permadeath, with a varying set of characters available to each episode of the game, meaning that when you die, instead of just reloading to a previous save, the character you were playing as is now gone, and you'll play as someone else with their own motivation for exploring the house, and their own unique set of stats, which adds a layer of depth to the fact that death comes with its own unique repercussions without it feeling too punishing. And along with this, the thing that you'll be running or hiding from throughout the game is only known as the Presence, which is controlled by an advanced AI that will learn and adapt to the way you play, making the scares feel less forced and a lot more unpredictable. If you're a fan of horror and have a love or nostalgia for games like Silent Hill, Resident Evil, Fatal Frame, or The Clock Tower, then this game is definitely worth a go. It's not going to light your world on fire, but it'll definitely give you that sense of familiarity while also bringing you a whole new experience. Elden Ring, developed by From Software. Elden Ring feels like a love letter to old school game design, only wrapped up in stunning visuals and fluid animations. It won't hold your hand, and it will kick you when you're down. Just like Dark Souls and the games that inspired that series, it expects you to explore, experiment, and figure things out for yourself. There are no quest markers or intrusive tutorials. Instead, you're dropped into the lands between with nothing but a vague sense of purpose and a world full of secrets waiting to be uncovered. The influence of classic games is all over. Its open world design calls back to the freedom and mystery of The Legend of Zelda on the NES. You're encouraged to wander wherever your curiosity takes you, whether that's to a ruined castle on the horizon, an ominous cave you stumble upon by accident, or even to a giant jar person stuck in a hole. And much like those old school adventures, the game does not care if you're ready for what's ahead. It's up to you to decide when to fight and when to run. The game is tough but fair, with the same learn through failure philosophy that made older games so rewarding. Every enemy, no matter how small, demands respect, and bosses feel like puzzles as much as fights. You can almost hear the echoes of old arcade games, where perseverance and sounds of draining piggy banks were the only way to succeed. Then there's the world design. Every location in Elden Ring feels handcrafted, like the sprawling maps of games like Castlevania. The interconnected world is filled with shortcuts, hidden areas, and optional content that rewards players for poking around in every corner. And just when you think you've seen it all, the game reveals yet another massive area to explore. Even the storytelling feels inspired by the classics. Instead of spoon-feeding you lore, the game hides its story in item descriptions, cryptic NPC dialogue, and environmental details, which although isn't exactly the same, it reminds me of when I was a kid reading through the manual for Metal Gear Solid, trying to find out as much as I could about the game. George R.R. Martin may have added some flair, but this kind of minimalistic player-driven storytelling is pure From Software, and reminiscent of games where imagination filled in the gaps. Cuphead, developed by Studio MDHR. Sometimes modern games feel like a love letter to the golden era of gaming, but Cuphead isn't just a letter, it's a full shrine and monument. Released in 2017, this run-and-gun game doesn't just borrow its aesthetic from 1930s cartoons. It recreates the vibe with hand-drawn animation, jazzy tunes, and a sense of charm so strong, it almost makes you forget that the game is actively trying to destroy you. There's no denying that Cuphead is brutal. It's like stepping into an arcade and trying to play Ghosts and Goblins or Missile Command without losing every single penny you brought with you. But it's the good kind of brutal, the kind that makes every victory feel hard-earned. It's a game where pattern recognition and split-second timing are your best friends. Well, that, and if you can find one, a patient co-op partner who won't immediately flip the sofa when things go wrong. But what makes Cuphead such a standout is how seamless it merges that old school difficulty with modern polish. Every boss fight is its own wild, imaginative set piece. You'll go from fighting a giant evil carrot to squaring off against a sentient zeppelin in no time at all. And somehow, despite all the chaos, the game never feels unfair. It's tough but precise, demanding skill without ever feeling cheap. Of course, it's impossible to talk about Cuphead without mentioning its visuals. The art style is pure 1930s animation, down to the grainy film filter and wobbly hand-drawn lines. It's stunning, and the sheer amount of care that went into every single frame makes it feel like playing a living cartoon. Combine that with a soundtrack that could have been pulled straight from a jazz club, and you've got a game that feels timeless. So if you've got a soft spot for classic cartoons, old school design, or just really love having your ass handed to you, then Cuphead is a must play. It's proof that games can look and feel like classics while still being something entirely different. That's the video. Why don't you let me know what games you think were inspired by the old classics? And while you're at it, why not hit the like and subscribe button? And I'll see you in the next video.